All right, so I just got a call from the buyer's agent. I'm representing a listing. Buyer's agent just called me and told me that the buyer is canceling on the very last day of their contingencies over something that we could not control as the selling side. And in fact, I'm actually seeing a lot of cancellations at the moment from just different things on the buyer side of the transaction. And I think it's important as a potential seller to know about these things. So I want to take some time and actually go over them in more detail, so you know what to watch out for. Right now, I'm seeing more deals fall apart than I've seen in years. So if you're selling a home in today's market, you need to know what's killing deals before they happen. As you know, right now, inventory is rising and it's giving buyers out there a lot more choices. And because buyers have more choices now, they're no longer willing to settle or overlook potential issues that they might have just a couple of weeks or months ago. Now with that, some of the cancellations that I'm seeing are the buyer's choice. Some are the lender's choice. And others are actually the insurance company's choice. Now, if you've watched any of my videos before, I often talk about things that you should not repair prior to listing your home. And I typically talk about the things that are working in your home, the things that are just older. Maybe they're a little bit dated, they don't show quite as well, but they're functioning properly. Well, here's the issue with that potential statement at the moment. Things like older roofs, older plumbing, older electrical panels are now becoming a big issue with buyers and insurance companies when it comes to selling your home. And that's because many insurance companies out there are now refusing to write policies for homes that have older systems, older roofs, older electrical panels, maybe in some cases even a recalled electrical panel. So as a seller, it's better to be cautious out there when you're going through offers, when you're going through that negotiation phase, even coming back for a request for repairs, to look at the items that are being requested, because in some cases, if these items aren't addressed, it could cause your transaction to fall apart completely. Now with that, most of the roofs that are being put on in, say, the last 15 to 20 to 25 years have basically been these 20 to 25 year roofs. That's more or less the guarantee on the roof when these were installed. But here's the problem. Roofs that are now 15, 20, 22, 23 years old are now getting called out by these insurance companies. Even though they're not leaking, even though there's no problems with them, the insurance company is now asking any buyer that comes in and wants insurance on a particular property how old these items are. So that buyer and their agents coming back to, say, me as the listing agent and asking additional questions about the age of the roof. When was it installed? Do you know how long the guarantee on the roof was? How old is the electrical panel? What type of electrical panel is it? Has the plumbing ever been updated? On top of asking questions about things like the HVAC and even the water heater. Now, as a seller, I don't think that means that you need to run out and replace these items prior to listing your home, but they need to be things that you're thinking about when that buyer's coming back and they're asking for repairs, whether or not that's going to be a potential issue or a holdup when that buyer goes to get insurance on that property. Because as a seller, you can refuse to do those repairs, but here's the issue. Any reports that were done, any inspections that were done by that buyer now have to be disclosed to any other buyers coming into that property. So if you have an issue that's going to be an insurance issue with one particular buyer, chances are it's likely going to be the same issue with any other buyers coming in. So what I suggest is maybe prior to listing your home for sale, if you have some of these older items on your property, maybe have your agent reach out to an insurance company to see what insurance looks like on that particular property. Are they going to have any issues getting insurance? Because if they don't, and a buyer comes in and says, hey, we're having issues finding insurance, we need these items replaced, you can go back and say, no, we actually have an insurance company here that will insure the property, this is the amount, and you can provide the details versus letting them lead the negotiation. Now that's only one particular issue that I'm seeing at the moment. The next issue is something that I recently had on the property that I mentioned as I started this video that fell out of escrow. In fact, this has happened to me 2 times in the last 4 months of representing sellers on properties. And that is the fact that someone had passed away on the property from natural causes. I'm located here in the state of California, and sellers are required to disclose any deaths on properties going back at least 3 years. So if you are a particular seller and you've had someone pass away in a property and it's something that you now have to disclose, understand that there's a high likelihood it could impact the buyer demand of your property. Now remember, us as agents, our job is to create exposure on your property that draws demand that ultimately leads to a higher price on that property. So the more exposure, the more demand equals a higher price. But here's the thing, we can do all the exposure in the world on a property and get that potential demand to the table. But if they find out there's a particular issue with a property, in some cases, say a death on a property, that could cause our demand to diminish, which could end up impacting your bottom line. So the reason I bring this up, now I realize it's not something you can control, but let's say, for example, you knew someone passed away in your property 2 years and 6 months ago, and in 6 months you no longer have to disclose that death on property. It may be worth waiting depending on who your buyer demographic is, so that that's no longer anything you have to disclose to buyers coming into that home. Because in the 2 cases of the listings that we've had to disclose it, it's created issues. In fact, we've had deals fall apart like the one I just mentioned the very last day contingencies were supposed to be released because that buyer decided they were no longer okay with it. In fact, I recently asked this question on another video I did, and the answers were an overwhelming no, I wouldn't be okay with it. So I'm going to ask you, if you knew someone had passed away in a property, would you be okay buying that property, or would you run away? Let me know in the comments. Now, before we dive into the next thing that I'm seeing a lot of problems with, do me a favor and hit that thumbs up if you find any value in my videos at all. And if you want to stay updated on everything about how to sell your home for top dollar, please consider subscribing to the channel. Solar panels are either something you love or hate. But here's the issue, whether you love them or hate them, they are causing a lot of issues for potential buyers looking to buy your home, especially when those solar panels have been leased. And that's because when solar panels are leased, any buyer buying your home now has to qualify for that same lease that you had to qualify for when putting those solar panels on your home. See, here's the issue. A lot of buyers are really stretched at the moment when it comes to affordability. Their DTIs are really pushing limits because house prices are high, interest rates are high, and things are just out of whack, if you will, overall. And now comes the issue because the buyer now has to qualify for those solar panels. So the solar company now has to look at their income, has to look at their debt, and figure out, yes, they qualify to take over these solar panels, but here's the thing. The lender now has to take that new payment and factor it into the debt to income ratios. And if those ratios were maxed out to begin with, qualifying for that solar lease could push them over the edge and that deal could fall apart. So if you are somebody out there that has solar panels on your home, have your agent do the best they can with giving as much information on the MLS to any potential buyers coming into that property, like how much the actual lease of those solar panels is, as well as how much time is on that lease. Is it a power purchase agreement? Describe exactly what that type of lease is so the buyers have that information up front and can run it by their lender when they're going through that pre-approval phase or when they're talking about that particular property with their lender. You just want to make sure that you're not going to get into a deal that falls apart at the last minute. Most solar lease companies are going to approve any buyer coming in looking to take over that lease. That's not the issue. The issue is when the lender that's doing the mortgage finds out about that potential lease and now has to factor it in. Do they still qualify? Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned insurance issues when it comes to older roofs, electrical panels, that sort of thing. Another issue I'm seeing at the moment is insurance issues when you're in a high fire risk area or you're in an area that's prone to natural disasters. Here in the state of California, especially in Southern California, we have a lot of areas that are now deemed high fire areas, and these are becoming big issues when it comes to getting insurance. In fact, it's so much an issue that a lot of buyers out there can't get insurance through a typical carrier. They actually have to go through the state-run program in order to get insurance on that property, which typically means insurance premiums a lot higher than they would be otherwise. And because this has become such a problem, we now have a contingency in the real estate purchase agreement that gives the buyer a specific amount of time in order to get insurance on that home. Now, this is something that's just come about recently, but it's so much of an issue that it's now become part of the contract. But either way, at least you know it going into the process. And the last one I want to talk about is properties that are located in HOAs. I'm seeing a lot of deals fall apart right now because properties that were once financeable by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are now considered non-warrantable condos, which means that buyer can't get traditional financing on that property. Now, this can happen for one of many reasons. Sometimes it's insurance issues with the condo itself, because as we mentioned earlier, insurance is becoming a big problem, especially in certain areas of California or in other areas where there's natural disasters like hurricanes and flooding and all of this crazy stuff happening. It's creating insurance issues. And not only have we seen premiums rise in a lot of these different buildings, which is creating demand issues and properties to sit long longer on the market, it's now causing some deals to fall apart because buyers either can't get insurance on them, for one, or the premiums are just too high that buyers aren't willing to deal with it. So if your property is located in an HOA that you know is having litigation issues, having reserve issues, having balcony issues or assessment issues, anything like that, these things are not only creating issues with potential buyers, but they're also creating issues with lenders not willing to finance these deals. And because of that, deals are falling apart at the last minute. So if you're a seller out there, you need to be aware of what's happening in your community, not only so you can disclose it to your agent who can give you some guidance on this stuff, but also so that you have the proper expectations when it comes to selling your home. I just got off the phone with a seller that I just helped who called me and asked me if I could help their friend, and she started telling me about the property. And I asked her, hey, why do you think it's not selling? And she said, well, this is where it's located, so on and so forth. Well, one thing I looked up, well, it was located in a high fire area. And I said, well, this is probably the issue, right? It's probably giving buyers some reservation because of the potential of fires in the area on top of the insurance costs. And she came back and said, yeah, that's kind of what their agent has been telling them as well. And I said, yeah, well, that's probably the case. So remember, when it comes to selling your home, it's not always about the price. Sometimes it's about removing the roadblocks before they stop your sale in its tracks. Now, if you're thinking about selling your home, you know some of these things could potentially impact your ability to sell, and you want to work with a top real estate agent like myself. I've created a list of pre-vetted real estate agents just like myself that I've been working with and networking with for over 20 years. So if you'd like to work with somebody like me, do me a favor and check that link in the description of the video. And the last thing I'll say is upgrading your home is really, really important prior to selling it. But the last thing you want to do is go cheap on these upgrades. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, do me a favor and check out this video here.